During a supervised flight to meet her father in another city, a 10-year-old black girl finds herself at the center of an event that will challenge all the expectations of the crew. Amara Johnson, an unaccompanied minor, seemed just like any other child traveling alone, but her last name held an extraordinary secret. What should have been an ordinary trip quickly transforms into a struggle for respect and dignity as the crew and passengers confront their own assumptions and prejudices. The Atlanta-bound jet bridge stretched before 8-year-old Amara Johnson like a tunnel to another world. Her small hands clutched Mr. Buttons, the well-loved teddy bear whose left eye had been sewn back on 3 separate times. The unaccompanied minor badge pinned to her purple cardigan felt heavy, marking her as different from the business travelers rushing past. "Keep moving, honey," the gate agent said without looking at her face. Her voice had the flat, rehearsed quality of someone speaking to furniture rather than a child. Amara straightened her shoulders beneath her rainbow butterfly backpack. Grandma Eleanor always said, "Stand tall, even when others try to make you small." And Grandma knew everything. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant with perfectly styled hair and a crisp uniform greeted passengers with practiced smiles. "Welcome aboard," he said to the man in front of Amara, eyes crinkling with warmth. When Amara stepped forward, those same eyes swept over her head, already focusing on the passengers behind. "Excuse me," Amara said, her voice soft but clear. "Can you please tell me where seat 3A is?" The flight attendant, Richard, according to his name tag, finally looked down. His smile remained, but the warmth vanished like morning dew under harsh sun. "First class is to the left," he said slowly, as if she might not understand English. He barely glanced at her boarding pass. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Amara nodded. "My grandma booked it specially." Richard's eyebrows lifted slightly before he waved her forward, already turning to the next passenger. "Right. Left side, window seat." The first-class cabin gleamed with soft beige leather and polished surfaces. Men and women in business attire tapped at laptops or stared at phones, creating a low murmur of importance. As Amara walked down the aisle, several passengers glanced up, their expressions shifting from curiosity to confusion to dismissal in rapid succession. Finding 3A, Amara carefully placed Mr. Buttons on the wide windowsill and tucked her backpack under the seat in front, just as Grandma had instructed. The leather seat swallowed her small frame, her feet dangling inches above the floor. "Would you like something to drink before takeoff?" A different flight attendant asked the man across the aisle, setting a glass of water on his tray table. Amara waited for her turn to be asked, but the attendant walked past without acknowledging her presence. This wasn't new. Grandma Eleanor explained that sometimes people would look right through her, but that didn't make her invisible. It made them blind. From her backpack, Amara pulled out her favorite book, Amazing Black Girls Who Changed the World. The colorful cover showed young girls with skin like hers, standing proud and accomplished. Grandma said knowledge was armor no one could take away. As passengers continued boarding, Amara felt rather than saw the quick glances, the subtle head shakes, the whispered comments. A businessman took the aisle seat in her row without a word, immediately raising the armrest barrier between them and angling away. Amara focused on her book, running her finger under each word as she read about Mae Jemison, the first black woman in space. She wondered if Mae had ever felt alone in a room full of people who wouldn't see her. The cabin filled, conversations hummed, but around Amara, a small bubble of silence persisted. It wasn't that people were being mean. Not yet. They simply acted as if the space she occupied contained nothing but empty air. She hugged Mr. Buttons closer and whispered into his tattered ear, "It's okay. Grandma Eleanor will be waiting in Atlanta." She didn't know then how much would happen before she'd see her grandmother's face. The captain's voice crackled over the speakers announcing final boarding, completely unaware that the real turbulence would begin long before the plane left the ground. The plane was nearly full when raised voices erupted from the front of the cabin. Amara looked up from her book to see a family of 3 making their way down the aisle, expensive luggage in tow and irritation painted across their faces. "This is absolutely unacceptable," the man announced loudly as if his inconvenience deserved a public audience. His tailored suit and gold watch seemed designed to broadcast importance. We specifically requested seats together when we paid for these tickets. Richard, the flight attendant who had barely acknowledged Amara earlier, rushed forward with an entirely different demeanor. Back straight, smile wide, eyes attentive. "Mr. Reynolds, I do apologize for any confusion. Let me see what we can do to help you and your family." Mrs. Reynolds adjusted her designer sunglasses on top of her perfectly highlighted hair. "This wouldn't happen if we flew private," she muttered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We're only on this flight because your meeting was rescheduled at the last minute." Their teenage son, maybe 15 or 16, stood slumped behind them, eyes glued to his phone. He wore clothes that probably cost more than everything Amara owned, yet somehow managed to look bored by their very existence. Mr. Reynolds thrust their boarding passes at Richard. "Seats 3B, 3C, and 4A. We need to be seated together. My son can't sit separated from us." The teenager rolled his eyes without looking up from his phone. "Dad, I literally don't care where I sit." "Hush, Braden," Mrs. Reynolds snapped. "Family stays together. That's non-negotiable." Richard examined their tickets with intense concentration, a courtesy he hadn't shown to Amara's. His forehead wrinkled as he looked toward Amara's seat, then back at the boarding passes. "I see the issue," he said, lowering his voice confidentially but not quite enough to prevent Amara from hearing. "It seems someone has been assigned to 3A, which would put them in the middle of your seats." Mr. Reynolds followed Richard's gaze to where Amara sat quietly, still holding her book. His expression shifted from irritation to disbelief. "You're telling me that child is in first class? Sitting between our seats?" The way he said "that child" made Amara shrink a little deeper into the oversized leather seat. Mrs. Reynolds didn't bother lowering her voice. Since when do children fly first class unaccompanied? Especially, she didn't finish her sentence, but her meaning hung in the air like something sour. Richard's professional smile tightened. "Let me check the manifest. There must be some mistake." As Richard pulled out his tablet, Braden finally glanced up from his phone and noticed Amara. Their eyes met briefly before he smirked and whispered something to his mother that made her purse her lips. Richard scrolled through his tablet with increasing agitation. He leaned closer to the Reynolds family, but his whisper carried. "I don't understand how this happened. The system shows she's confirmed in 3A, but clearly there's been an error. First-class tickets are over $1,200 for this route." Mr. Reynolds huffed. "Well, fix it. We're not playing musical chairs because of a computer glitch." Richard nodded, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Amara. The warmth he'd shown the Reynolds family evaporated as he approached her seat. His entire demeanor transformed. Eyes cold, smile gone, shoulders tense with annoyed purpose. Amara clutched Mr. Buttons closer, a small shield against what was coming. Grandma Eleanor had warned her that people might question her belonging in certain spaces. "Never apologize for taking up the space you've earned," she'd said. But Grandma wasn't here now, and Amara suddenly felt very small as Richard towered over her seat, clipboard in hand and judgment in his eyes. "Excuse me, young lady," he said, his voice no longer the warm tone he'd used with the Reynolds family. "We need to have a little talk about your seating assignment." Richard's shadow fell over Amara like a cold blanket. He leaned down, one hand on the seat in front of her, creating a barrier between her and the rest of the cabin. His voice changed to that special tone adults reserve for children they think aren't very bright. "Sweetie," he said, drawing out the word, "I think there's been a mix-up with your ticket." Amara looked up from her book, meeting his gaze directly as Grandma had taught her. "My ticket says 3A. That's this seat." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, but sometimes computers make mistakes. This is first class." He gestured around the cabin as if she hadn't noticed. "These seats cost a lot of money. They're for certain types of passengers." Behind him, Mrs. Reynolds crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently. "We're going to be late for takeoff because of this nonsense." Amara reached carefully into her backpack and pulled out her boarding pass, the one Grandma had printed especially and placed in a plastic protective sleeve. "See? It says 3A, first class, window seat." Her voice remained steady, though her heart thumped against her ribs like a trapped bird. Richard barely glanced at the ticket before waving it away. Anyone can make a boarding pass on a computer these days. I need to see your real ticket in the system. Mr. Reynolds stepped closer. Richard, we don't have time for this. Our family needs to be seated together. Of course, sir. Richard turned back to Amara, his voice hardening. Listen, young lady. This section is for passengers who pay premium prices. Important people. He emphasized the word important while looking pointedly at her worn cardigan and scuffed shoes. You need to move to where you actually belong. Amara clutched Mr. Buttons tighter. My grandma said, Your grandma isn't here, Richard cut her off, and I'm the flight attendant in charge. I know where passengers are supposed to sit. A few nearby passengers glanced over, then quickly looked away. One businessman peered at Amara over his reading glasses, then shook his head and returned to his newspaper. I can't move, Amara said softly. Grandma Eleanor said I have to stay in seat 3A. She made me promise. Mrs. Reynolds leaned toward her husband. Can you believe this? We're being delayed because of one stubborn child. Where are her parents anyway? Mr. Reynolds replied, loud enough for Amara to hear. Who lets a child this age fly alone? Irresponsible. Richard straightened up and addressed the Reynolds family directly. I apologize for this situation. I'll resolve it immediately. Then he turned back to Amara, his professional mask slipping to reveal cold impatience. This is your last chance to cooperate willingly. These nice people paid a lot of money to sit together. So did my grandma, Amara whispered, looking down at her boarding pass. Richard's nostrils flared. I highly doubt that. A first-class ticket costs more than... He stopped himself, but his meaning was clear to everyone listening. Tears began to well in Amara's eyes, but she remembered Grandma's words. Your tears are precious. Don't give them to people who don't deserve them. She blinked hard, holding them back. People like you, Richard continued, lowering his voice but not enough to prevent others from hearing, should be grateful to be on the plane at all. You don't belong in first class. The words hit Amara like physical blows. She knew exactly what people like you meant. She'd heard it before, in stores when security followed her and Grandma, at restaurants when they were seated near kitchens, at school when teachers expressed surprise at her test scores. A single tear escaped despite her efforts, rolling down her cheek and landing on Mr. Button's worn fur. Through blurry eyes, she saw the Reynolds family watching with impatient disapproval and the other passengers pretending not to notice what was happening. Richard reached for her backpack. Let's go find where you're really supposed to be seated. Amara held onto her seat with one hand and Mr. Buttons with the other, feeling very alone and very small as the adults around her decided she didn't belong. I don't have all day, Richard snapped, his patience visibly evaporating. This flight needs to depart on schedule. Mr. Reynolds checked his Rolex with an exaggerated gesture. We're already running 15 minutes late. My business meeting. We understand, sir, Richard interrupted. This will be resolved immediately. The contrast between his deferential tone with the Reynolds family and his harsh manner with Amara couldn't have been more stark. Mrs. Reynolds tapped her manicured fingernails against the seat back. No respect these days. None whatsoever. Her voice carried deliberately through the cabin. When I was her age, I knew better than to inconvenience adults. Someone clearly failed to teach her proper manners. Amara's fingers trembled around Mr. Buttons. She wasn't being disrespectful. She was following her grandmother's instructions. But the accusations stung, especially with so many strangers watching. Richard's hand closed around Amara's upper arm, his grip firm enough to make her wince. Enough. You're holding up the entire flight. He tugged, trying to pull her from the seat. Please don't, Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. My ticket is right. I'm supposed to be here. Across the aisle, a woman in a business suit glanced up from her laptop, frowned briefly at the scene, then deliberately put on noise-canceling headphones. Another passenger chuckled quietly and whispered something to his seatmate, who smirked in response. Everyone's watching you make a scene, Richard hissed. Is that what you want? To embarrass yourself in front of all these important people? Braden, the Reynolds' teenage son, had finally put his phone away to enjoy the spectacle. Dad, we're never going to take off at this rate. Can't they just, remove her? That's coming next, Richard assured him, still gripping Amara's arm. Security can escort her if necessary. A middle-aged man 3 rows ahead turned around. Instead of intervening, he called out, "Some of us have connections to make. Can we move this along?" Several other passengers murmured in agreement. Mrs. Reynolds seized the opportunity. "You see? You're inconveniencing everyone, not just us." She leaned closer to Amara, her expensive perfume overwhelming. "Little girl, sometimes you need to learn your place." Amara looked desperately around the cabin, searching for a friendly face, anyone who might help. She found none. Some passengers stared with open annoyance, others deliberately looked away, and a few watched with the detached interest of people observing an inconvenient roadside incident. "My grandma said—" Amara tried again. "Your grandma isn't here." Richard's voice rose sharply. "And I highly doubt she paid for a first-class ticket. People don't waste that kind of money on children, especially—" He caught himself, but everyone knew what went unsaid. "Especially children like you. Black children. Children who didn't look like they belonged in expensive seats." "Let me see your boarding pass again," Richard demanded, snatching it from her hand before she could respond. He examined it with exaggerated scrutiny. "This doesn't look right. The barcode must have misdirected you to the wrong section." A passenger behind Amara laughed softly. "Kids these days think they can sit wherever they want." Another added, "When I was growing up, we knew our place." The weight of all those eyes, judging, dismissing, annoying, pressed down on Amara's small shoulders. She felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller with each comment, each stare, each moment no one stepped forward to help. Richard tugged her arm again, harder this time. "Last chance to come willingly before I call security." Through tear-blurred eyes, Amara spotted someone new approaching, a woman in the same uniform as Richard, but with additional stripes on the sleeve. Her tag read, "Lisa, Lead Flight Attendant." For one hopeful moment, Amara thought help had arrived. Then she saw the woman's face, stern, annoyed, already decided, and understood that things were about to get even worse. Lisa, the lead flight attendant, approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to solving problems quickly. Her crisp uniform and perfectly arranged hair projected authority. She stopped beside Richard, assessing the situation with quick, practiced eyes. "What seems to be the issue here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she'd already decided who was at fault. Richard gestured toward Amara. "This child is refusing to vacate seat 3A. The Reynolds family needs their seats together." Lisa looked down at Amara, her gaze traveling from the girl's curly hair to her worn shoes in a slow, deliberate inspection that made Amara want to disappear into the leather seat. There was nothing curious or kind in that examination, only suspicion and judgment. "How exactly did you end up in first class?" Lisa asked, her voice sharp with accusation. She didn't wait for an answer before continuing. "Let me see your boarding pass." With trembling fingers, Amara handed over the plastic-protected ticket that Grandma had prepared so carefully. Lisa snatched it, holding it up to the light as if searching for evidence of forgery. "This can't be right," Lisa muttered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Who checked you in? Who let you through the gate like this?" "The gate lady scanned my pass," Amara said quietly. "It beeped green." Lisa's eyebrows shot up. "Green doesn't always mean correct. Machines make mistakes. People make mistakes." She leaned closer, her perfume mingling with the scent of coffee on her breath. "How did you really get this boarding pass?" The accusation hung in the air. Several passengers were now openly watching the spectacle, some with barely concealed amusement, others with impatient annoyance. "My grandmother bought my ticket," Amara explained, her voice growing smaller with each word. "She said I should fly first class because—" Lisa's laugh cut her off, a sharp, dismissive sound that made Amara flinch. "Your grandmother? Sweetie, do you have any idea how much a first-class ticket costs?" Mrs. Reynolds didn't bother hiding her smirk. "More than some people make in a week." "Exactly," Lisa agreed. "Over $1,200 for this flight. Are you telling me your grandmother spent that much to fly a child alone?" The way she said it, the emphasis on "your grandmother" and "that much," carried a clear message that everyone in earshot understood. The implication that Amara's family couldn't possibly afford such luxury was as loud as if she'd shouted it. "She did," Amara whispered, clutching Mr. Buttons tighter. "Grandma, Eleanor said—" "Listen," Lisa interrupted, her patience visibly thinning. "I've been working these flights for 15 years. I know when something isn't right." She turned to Richard. "Check her name against the manifest again. There must be a duplicate reservation or computer error." As Richard tapped on his tablet, a businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper. "Some of us have places to be. Can't you just move her to economy and sort it out later?" "Exactly what I'm trying to do, sir," Lisa assured him before turning back to Amara with a hardened expression. "This is holding up an entire aircraft of passengers who actually paid to be here." That actually stung Amara like a physical slap. The implication was clear. She didn't pay, didn't belong, was somehow cheating the system. "My grandmother did pay," Amara insisted, her voice wavering but determined. "She said it was important for me to be in this exact seat." Lisa exchanged a look with Richard, the kind adults share when they think a child is lying. And why would that be so important? Her tone dripped with condescension. Before Amara could answer, Lisa reached for the colorful backpack tucked beside her seat. "Let's see if your actual ticket is in here somewhere. Your real ticket, not this one you're showing us." Something in her tone, the absolute certainty that Amara was lying, was wrong, didn't belong, finally broke the dam holding back Amara's tears. They welled in her eyes, threatening to spill over as Lisa's hands closed around her backpack. "Wait, please." Amara's protest came too late. Lisa had already yanked the colorful backpack from beside her seat, its butterfly patches and hand-drawn stars suddenly looking childish and out of place in the sleek first-class cabin. "If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about," Lisa stated, her tone suggesting Amara was a seasoned criminal rather than an 8-year-old child. Without hesitation or permission, she unzipped the main compartment and turned the backpack upside down. The contents of Amara's carefully packed bag tumbled onto the pristine carpet of the first-class aisle. A small journal with a unicorn cover, colored pencils that scattered in all directions, a plastic bag with apple slices, a change of clothes neatly folded by her grandmother, a photo in a frame, and an envelope marked "Emergency Contact Information. Eleanor Blackwell." "Is this really necessary?" A hesitant voice came from several rows back, but it was quickly silenced by murmurs from other passengers eager to see the drama unfold. Amara dropped to her knees, desperately trying to gather her belongings before they scattered further. As she reached for her journal, Brayden Reynolds deliberately extended his foot, placing it squarely on top of the book. "Oops," he said with a smirk when Amara looked up at him. "Didn't see you there." Lisa rifled through the items on the floor, picking up the emergency contact envelope and scanning it with narrowed eyes. "Blackwell? As in Eleanor Blackwell? That's who you're claiming is your grandmother?" She said the name with such disbelief that several passengers chuckled. A woman in an expensive suit commented to her seatmate, "Children and their imaginations." Tears now streamed freely down Amara's cheeks as she tried to collect her colored pencils rolling under seats. "Please, my things." "What I want to know," Lisa continued, ignoring Amara's distress, "is whose boarding pass you took. Did you find it somewhere? Did someone give it to you as a prank?" She looked around the cabin as if expecting the real owner of the first-class ticket to speak up. Mrs. Reynolds bent down, her voice falsely sweet. "Sweetie, taking things that don't belong to you is stealing. You could get in serious trouble." "I didn't steal anything." Amara's voice broke as she tried to defend herself. "Grandma Eleanor bought my ticket. She printed it for me herself." Mr. Reynolds scoffed. "Eleanor Blackwell is your grandmother? Next, you'll tell us the president is your uncle." Amara's photograph, her most treasured possession showing her and Grandma Eleanor at her 8th birthday party 3 months ago, lay face down on the carpet. As she reached for it, Richard stepped forward, accidentally on purpose placing his polished shoe on the corner of the frame. The glass cracked with an audible snap. The sound hit Amara like a physical blow. That picture was her talisman, her comfort for when she missed her grandmother. Now it lay damaged beneath a stranger's foot, just like her dignity. "Oh dear," clumsy me," Richard said without a trace of sincerity. "Perhaps this is why children shouldn't bring fragile items on aircraft." Lisa continued her interrogation while Amara knelt on the floor. "How did you even get past the gate agents? Did you sneak in while they weren't looking? Did someone help you?" The accusations piled higher as Amara's belongings remained scattered. A colored pencil rolled to a stop against the expensive leather loafer of a businessman, who nudged it away as if it were something unclean. "Probably slipped past while the agents were busy with real passengers," someone muttered. The humiliation was total now. Her privacy invaded, her possessions strewn about, her words dismissed, her tears ignored. Even the few passengers who seemed uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them remained silent, unwilling to intervene. Lisa held up Amara's boarding pass again like evidence at a trial. "I'm calling security. We need to find out how she got hold of this and who's really supposed to be in this seat." As if on cue, the cabin phone rang. Richard reached for it, his eyes still fixed on Amara with cold disapproval. "This child," he said into the receiver, "is becoming a security issue." Amara's tears fell silently onto the first-class carpet, each drop another small piece of her breaking apart. She remained on her knees, fingers trembling as she gathered her scattered belongings. The broken picture frame of her and Grandma Eleanor cut her fingers slightly as she picked it up, leaving a tiny smear of blood on the cracked glass. "Look, she's crying now," Mr. Reynolds announced loudly. "That's what happens when kids get caught doing something they shouldn't. The waterworks start." Several passengers nodded in agreement. A woman adjusted her pearl necklace and said, "In my day, children knew better than to try stunts like this. Proper discipline makes all the difference." Richard stood over Amara, arms crossed. Typical. They always resort to tears when they're caught, as if that changes anything. Amara wasn't crying to manipulate anyone. She was crying because her world had collapsed, because adults who should protect children were hurting her instead, because strangers were treating her like a criminal, because her precious photograph was broken, and because no matter what she said, no one believed her. "Please," she whispered, "call my grandma. Her number is in the envelope." Lisa snorted. "Oh, we'll be calling someone all right, but not your imaginary grandmother." She held up her phone. "Security is on their way. They'll find out where you really belong and who you're really with." A young woman in row 5 had her phone out, recording the entire scene. Instead of helping, she zoomed in on Amara's tear-streaked face, capturing her humiliation for strangers to view later. The red recording light seemed to mock Amara's distress. "This is going to go viral," the woman whispered to her seatmate. "Flight attendants busting a kid who snuck into first class. So cringe." Mr. Reynolds checked his watch again. "Can we please resolve this? We're now 20 minutes delayed because of this situation." He gestured at Amara as if she were a spilled drink or torn upholstery. A mess to be cleaned up, not a child in distress. Richard decided to make an example of her. He raised his voice to address the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're dealing with a situation involving an unauthorized passenger in the first-class cabin. Security has been called to relocate this individual. Unauthorized passenger. As if she were a trespasser, an intruder." Each word struck Amara like physical blows as she clutched her damaged photograph. "I bet she just walked on board behind some family and slipped into an empty seat," a man in a business suit theorized loudly. "Kids are sneaky these days, always looking for handouts instead of earning their way." Braden Reynolds aimed his phone camera at Amara. "This is totally going on my TikTok. First class faker gets busted." He laughed at his own wit while his mother smiled indulgently. As Amara finally managed to gather most of her belongings, she noticed her journal had disappeared. She looked around frantically until she spotted it in Lisa's hands. The flight attendant was flipping through the private pages where Amara had written her thoughts and drawn pictures of her dreams. "Please, give that back," Amara whispered. "That's private." Lisa ignored her plea, turning a page with exaggerated interest. Very interesting imagination you have. My grandmother owns planes. Very creative." She held the journal up so others could see Amara's childish handwriting and colorful drawings, turning her most personal thoughts into public entertainment. A few passengers leaned forward to look, some laughing softly at the exposed pages. The final shreds of Amara's dignity seemed to dissolve with each turn of the page. She stopped reaching for her scattered colored pencils, stopped trying to defend herself, stopped expecting anyone to help. She simply knelt there, tears streaming silently, arms wrapped around her broken picture frame and Mr. Buttons. Through the blur of tears, she saw a security uniform appearing at the front of the cabin. The man's hand rested on his radio as Richard waved him over, pointing directly at Amara. "There's our problem," Richard said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Right there." The security officer, a broad-shouldered man with airport authority emblazoned across his uniform, made his way down the aisle. Passengers shifted in their seats, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. This was no longer just a delay. It had become a spectacle with Amara at its center. Lisa's fingers closed around Amara's upper arm, pinching the soft skin as she yanked her to her feet. "This has gone on long enough," she hissed. The smile she had worn earlier was completely gone, replaced by barely contained anger. "You're holding up an entire plane full of people who actually belong here." Amara's legs trembled beneath her. The broken picture frame clutched against her chest left tiny glass splinters in her cardigan. Mr. Buttons dangled from her other hand, his worn face witness to her humiliation. "Last chance," Lisa warned, her voice low and threatening. "Tell me who really bought this ticket and how you ended up with it, or you'll be talking to airport security instead. Trust me, they're not as patient as I've been." Patient wasn't the word Amara would have chosen. Neither was kind or fair or decent. All the things Grandma Eleanor had taught her adults should be, especially toward children. "My grandmother," Amara tried again between hiccuping sobs. "Eleanor Blackwell. She bought my ticket. She told me to stay in seat 3A no matter what." Lisa exchanged glances with Richard, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Eleanor Blackwell. Right. And I'm friends with Beyoncé." She leaned closer to Amara, her voice a harsh whisper. "Do you know what happens to children who lie to security officers? Do you know what happens to children who trespass where they don't belong?" The security officer was only 3 rows away now. "Mr. Reynolds gestured impatiently, calling out, "Officer, over here. This is holding up the entire flight." Amara's tears fell faster. "Please, call my grandma. Her number, it's in the envelope." "Enough with this grandmother fantasy," Lisa snapped. "No grandmother puts an 8-year-old alone in first class. Especially not." She stopped herself, but her meaning was clear in the curl of her lip as she looked at Amara's skin. The security officer reached their row, his expression professionally neutral. "What seems to be the problem here?" Richard stepped forward, voice dripping with authority. "We have an unauthorized minor in first class refusing to move to her proper seat. She's delaying departure and disrupting other passengers. She claims to be related to Eleanor Blackwell," Lisa added with a smirk. "You know, the billionaire." The officer's eyebrows rose slightly as he looked down at Amara. His gaze wasn't unkind, but it was assessing, calculating. "Is that so? And what's your name, young lady?" Before Amara could answer, Mrs. Reynolds interjected. "Does it matter? She clearly doesn't belong here and we need to depart. My husband has an important meeting in Atlanta." "Ma'am, I need to follow protocol," the officer replied, though his tone suggested he agreed with her assessment. Amara tried to speak through her tears. "My name is Amara Johnson Beale." "Johnson," Richard interrupted. "That's what her boarding pass says. Just Johnson." He emphasized the ordinary surname, dismissing the rest as fantasy. The officer nodded. "Well, Miss Johnson, I'm going to need you to gather your things and come with me. We can sort this out at the gate." "No!" Desperation gave Amara's voice new strength. "My grandma said I can't leave this seat. She said it's very important that I stay in 3A all the way to Atlanta. Please." Her plea echoed in the cabin, raw and heartfelt. For a moment, just a moment, something shifted in the atmosphere. A few passengers looked uncomfortable, suddenly seeing not a troublemaker but a frightened child. An elderly woman 2 rows ahead frowned, concern crossing her face for the first time. Lisa's grip on Amara's arm tightened, leaving white fingerprints on her dark skin. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling the captain." She reached for the cabin phone with her free hand. The security officer reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I need to verify a passenger manifest. Last name Johnson, first name." Richard's tablet chimed with an incoming message. He glanced down, irritation crossing his face at the interruption. "Wait," a new voice called from the front of the cabin. A younger flight attendant, her name tag read Tanya, was hurrying toward them, her expression urgent. "Richard, Lisa, hold on. You need to check something." Lisa waved her away. "Not now, Tanya. We're handling a situation." Tanya persisted, her voice rising with urgency. "No, you don't understand. You need to check the full passenger manifest right now." Tanya rushed down the aisle, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been in the back of the plane, checking on passengers when she overheard the commotion. The moment she heard Richard's voice, cold and dismissive, she knew she had to intervene. Something was very wrong. "Richard, Lisa," Tanya called out, her voice cutting through the tension in the cabin. "You need to check the full passenger manifest right now." Lisa turned, irritation flashing across her face. "Not now, Tanya. We're dealing with a situation here." "This is exactly why you need to check," Tanya insisted, her urgency rising. She could see Amara kneeling on the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching Mr. Buttons and her broken picture frame. The sight twisted something deep inside her. Richard glanced at Tanya, his expression skeptical. "What are you talking about? This child is causing a delay and we need to resolve it." "No, you don't understand," Tanya pressed, moving closer. "I just checked the list of passengers and there's something you need to see. This girl, Amara, she's not just any child. You need to look at her full name." Lisa rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "We don't have time for this. We need to get the flight moving." But Tanya was already pulling out her tablet, her fingers flying over the screen. "Just give me a second. I promise you this is important." As she scrolled through the passenger list, the tension in the cabin thickened. Amara remained on the floor, her small frame shaking with silent sobs. The other passengers were watching, some with curiosity, others with indifference. The atmosphere was charged, and Tanya could feel the weight of their gazes. "Here!" Tanya exclaimed, finally finding the information she needed. She turned the tablet toward Richard and Lisa, her heart racing. "Look at the last name. It's Johnson Blackwell. She's Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter." Richard's eyes widened, and for a moment, the air seemed to still. "What?" he said, disbelief etched on his face. "That can't be right." "It is," Tanya insisted, her voice rising with urgency. "Eleanor Blackwell is the CEO of this airline. If you treat her like this, it could ruin everything for us." Lisa snatched the tablet from Tanya's hands, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock as she read the name. "Johnson Blackwell? Are you serious?" "Yes," Tanya urged, stepping closer to Amara, who was still kneeling on the floor, looking lost and afraid. "Amara, is your grandmother Eleanor Blackwell?" Amara nodded slowly, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Yes, but they don't believe me." Lisa's demeanor changed instantly. The realization of who Amara was hit her like a freight train. "Oh my God," she whispered, glancing at Richard, who looked equally stunned. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" Richard asked, his voice now laced with concern rather than irritation. "I tried," Amara cried, her voice breaking. "I told you my grandma bought my ticket. I didn't want to leave my seat." The passengers around them began to murmur, the tension shifting as they processed the new information. Some looked at Amara with newfound sympathy, while others still seemed skeptical. "Listen," Tanya said, kneeling down to Amara's level. "We're going to fix this, I promise. Just hold on a little longer." Lisa's expression hardened again as she turned to Richard. "We need to handle this delicately. If she really is who she says she is, we can't let this escalate any further." Richard nodded, his earlier bravado fading. "Right. Let's get the captain involved. We need to make sure this is handled properly." As they moved to call the captain, Tanya stayed by Amara's side, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're going to be okay. Just a little longer, and we'll get this sorted out." Amara wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her heart racing. She had felt so alone, so small. But now there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone believed her. The cabin buzzed with whispers as the passengers began to realize the gravity of the situation. Tanya could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the collective understanding that they were witnessing something important unfold. "Just hang in there," Tanya whispered to Amara, squeezing her shoulder gently. "Help is on the way." As the captain approached, the tension in the cabin reached a boiling point, and Tanya knew that the truth was finally about to come to light. Tanya watched as Lisa and Richard exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from disbelief to dawning realization. The atmosphere in the cabin was electric, charged with anticipation as the truth about Amara began to unfold. "Let me see that again," Lisa said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. She held out her hand for the tablet, and Tanya quickly passed it back to her. Lisa scrolled through the passenger manifest, her eyes scanning the names until they landed on Amara's full name, Johnson Blackwell. Richard leaned closer, his brow furrowing. "This can't be right. Are you sure it's the same Eleanor Blackwell? There must be hundreds of people with that last name." Tanya shook her head, her heart racing. "No, it's her. I know it is. Eleanor Blackwell is a prominent figure in the airline industry. If this is her granddaughter, we need to handle this carefully." Lisa's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "If this is true, we've made a huge mistake." She looked down at Amara, who was still kneeling on the floor, clutching Mr. Buttons and her broken picture frame. The girl's tear-streaked face tugged at Lisa's conscience. "Amara," Lisa called softly, her tone changing to one of gentleness. "Can you tell us your grandmother's name again?" "Eleanor Blackwell," Amara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's the owner of this airline. She bought my ticket." Richard's eyes widened as he processed the implications. "If she is who she says she is, we need to get the captain involved immediately." "Right," Lisa agreed, her demeanor shifting from authoritative to apologetic. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through, Amara. We didn't know." The security officer, who had been standing by, looked between the flight attendants and Amara, confusion etched on his face. "What's going on here?" "Just a moment," Lisa said, her voice firm. "We need to verify this information before proceeding." As she spoke, the cabin door swung open, and the captain stepped in, his presence commanding immediate attention. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, scanning the room. "Captain, we have a situation," Lisa began, holding up the tablet. "This young girl, Amara, claims to be the granddaughter of Eleanor Blackwell, and we need to confirm her identity." The captain's expression shifted as he looked down at Amara, who was still on the floor, her eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. "Is that true, young lady?" he asked gently. Amara nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, sir. My grandma bought my ticket. She told me to stay in seat 3A. The captain knelt down to her level, his gaze softening. "I believe you, Amara. We're going to get this sorted out right away." Richard and Lisa exchanged worried glances as the captain took the tablet from Lisa's hands. He quickly scanned the passenger manifest, his brow furrowing as he read the name. Johnson Blackwell. "I see. This is serious." The cabin buzzed with whispers as passengers began to realize the gravity of the situation. Some looked at Amara with newfound sympathy, while others still seemed skeptical. "Let's get in touch with Eleanor Blackwell," the captain said, his voice steady. "We need to confirm this immediately." As he reached for the cabin phone, Tanya stayed close to Amara, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're going to be okay. Just a little longer, and we'll get this sorted out." Amara wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her heart racing. She had felt so alone, so small, but now there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone believed her. The captain spoke into the phone, his voice calm and authoritative. "This is Captain Harris. I need to speak with Eleanor Blackwell immediately. It's urgent." As he waited for a response, the tension in the cabin reached a boiling point. Amara could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, some filled with concern, others still skeptical. but she held on to the hope that her grandmother would come through for her. Finally, the captain's expression shifted as he listened intently. "Yes, I understand. Thank you." He hung up the phone and turned to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have just spoken with Eleanor Blackwell. She is aware of the situation and is on her way to the airport." A collective gasp filled the cabin, and Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone anymore. The truth was finally coming to light, and she could feel the tide turning in her pleas. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted dramatically as Captain Harris delivered the news. Amara felt a rush of hope and fear intertwining within her. She had always known her grandmother was important, but hearing her name spoken in the same breath as the airline made everything feel surreal. Lisa's expression morphed from skepticism to shock. "Eleanor Blackwell is on her way?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. This is serious." Richard, who had been standing with his arms crossed, suddenly uncrossed them, his posture shifting from authoritative to uncertain. "We need to handle this delicately," he said, glancing at Amara, who was still kneeling on the floor, clutching Mr. Buttons tightly. "Delicately?" Lisa echoed, her voice rising. "We've already made a mess of this. We need to apologize to her right now." Amara looked up at them, her heart racing. The way they were speaking made her feel like she was on the edge of something monumental. She had been treated like a problem, but now it seemed like the tide was turning. "Amara," Captain Harris said gently, kneeling beside her, "I want you to know that we're going to make this right. You're not in trouble. We just need to confirm everything with your grandmother." The captain's kindness washed over her like a warm blanket. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Meanwhile, the Reynolds family was in a state of disbelief. Mr. Reynolds leaned forward, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. "What do you mean she's Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter? That's impossible." Mrs. Reynolds scoffed, crossing her arms. "She doesn't look like someone who would fly first class. This must be a mistake." Braden, who had been recording the entire incident on his phone, lowered it slightly, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. "Wait, are you serious? She's related to Eleanor Blackwell?" "Yes," Tanya interjected, stepping closer to Amara. "And she deserves respect, just like everyone else on this flight." The passengers around them began to murmur. The realization of who Amara was sinking in. Some looked at her with newfound respect, while others still seemed skeptical. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and Amara could feel the weight of their gazes. "Listen," Captain Harris said, standing up and addressing the cabin. "We've all witnessed a misunderstanding today. I want to assure you that we take this matter seriously. Amara, you are welcome in first class, and I apologize for how you've been treated." The murmurs grew louder, and Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't just a child being dismissed anymore. She was part of something bigger. "Eleanor Blackwell is a respected figure in this industry," the captain continued, "and we will ensure that her granddaughter is treated with the dignity she deserves." Richard and Lisa exchanged glances, their earlier confidence shaken. "We didn't know," Lisa admitted, her voice softer now. "You thought wrong," Tanya interjected, her tone firm. "You judged her based on her appearance and made assumptions that were completely unfounded." Amara's heart swelled with gratitude for Tanya's support. She had felt so alone, but now there were people standing up for her, people who believed her. As the captain prepared to make an announcement to the entire cabin, the tension shifted. The passengers who had once been indifferent or cruel were now leaning forward, eager to hear what would happen next. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Harris began, his voice steady and authoritative, "I want to thank you for your patience during this situation. We are now in the process of confirming Amara's identity with her grandmother, and I assure you that we will resolve this matter promptly." The cabin buzzed with whispers, and Amara could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, some filled with sympathy, others still skeptical. But she held on to the hope that her grandmother would come through for her. "Thank you for your understanding," the captain concluded, "and thank you, Amara, for your patience as well." As he stepped back, Amara felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. She had stood her ground, and now the truth was finally coming to light. The power of her last name had shifted the entire narrative, and she was no longer just a child in distress. She was Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter, and she would not be silenced. As the cabin buzzed with whispers and murmurs, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The tension that had once filled the air with hostility began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of anticipation and curiosity. Amara felt a flicker of hope ignite within her as she clutched Mr. Buttons tightly, her heart racing. Just then, the cabin door swung open again, and Captain Harris stepped back inside, his presence commanding immediate attention. He walked with purpose, his expression serious yet warm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice steady, "I have just spoken with Eleanor Blackwell, and she is on her way to the airport. We will ensure that Amara is treated with the respect she deserves." Amara's heart soared at the captain's words. She wasn't just a child anymore. She was part of something significant. The passengers around her began to shift in their seats, some leaning forward with interest, others whispering to one another in disbelief. "Amara," the captain said, kneeling down to her level, "I want you to know that you are safe now. We're going to take care of everything." "Thank you," Amara replied, her voice trembling with emotion. She felt a wave of relief wash over her, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself to hope. Richard and Lisa exchanged glances, their earlier confidence shaken. "We didn't know," Richard admitted, his voice softer now. "We thought—" "You thought wrong," Tanya interjected, her tone firm. "You judged her based on her appearance and made assumptions that were completely unfounded." The captain stood up, addressing the cabin once more. "I want to apologize to Amara for how she has been treated. This is not how we conduct ourselves on this airline. We pride ourselves on providing a safe and welcoming environment for all our passengers." As he spoke, Amara could see the shift in the attitudes of the crew. Richard's posture relaxed, and Lisa's expression softened. They were no longer the antagonists in her story. They were now trying to make amends. "Amara," Lisa said, stepping closer, her voice sincere, "I'm truly sorry for what you've gone through. It was a misunderstanding, and I hope you can forgive us." Amara looked up at Lisa, her heart still racing. "It's okay," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. The hurt from earlier still lingered, but she could see that Lisa was genuinely remorseful. Meanwhile, the Reynolds family was in a state of disbelief. Mr. Reynolds leaned forward, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. "What do you mean, she's Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter? That's impossible!" Mrs. Reynolds scoffed, crossing her arms. "She doesn't look like someone who would fly first class. This must be a mistake." Braden, who had been recording the entire incident on his phone, lowered it slightly, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. "Wait, are you serious? She's related to Eleanor Blackwell?" "Yes," Tanya interjected, stepping closer to Amara. "And she deserves respect, just like everyone else on this flight." The passengers around them began to murmur, the realization of who Amara was sinking in. Some looked at her with newfound respect, while others still seemed skeptical. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and Amara could feel the weight of their gazes. "Listen," Captain Harris said, standing up and addressing the cabin. "We've all witnessed a misunderstanding today. I want to assure you that we take this matter seriously. Amara, you are welcome in first class, and I apologize for how you've been treated." The murmurs grew louder, and Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't just a child being dismissed anymore. She was a part of something bigger. "Eleanor Blackwell is a respected figure in this industry," the captain continued, "and we will ensure that her granddaughter is treated with the dignity she deserves." Richard and Lisa exchanged glances, their earlier confidence shaken. "We didn't know," Lisa admitted, her voice softer now. "We thought—" "You thought wrong," Tanya interjected, her tone firm. "You judged her based on her appearance and made assumptions that were completely unfounded." As the captain prepared to make an announcement to the entire cabin, the tension shifted. The passengers who had once been indifferent or cruel were now leaning forward, eager to hear what would happen next. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Harris began, his voice steady and authoritative, "I want to thank you for your patience during this situation. We are now in the process of confirming Amara's identity with her grandmother, and I assure you that we will resolve this matter promptly." The cabin buzzed with whispers, and Amara could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, some filled with sympathy, others still skeptical. But she held on to the hope that her grandmother would come through for her. "Thank you for your understanding," the captain concluded. "And thank you, Amara, for your patience as well." As he stepped back, Amara felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. She had stood her ground, and now the truth was finally coming to light. The power of her last name had shifted the entire narrative, and she was no longer just a child in distress. She was Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter, and she would not be silenced. Captain Harris knelt down beside Amara, his expression softening as he looked into her tear-filled eyes. "Amara," he said gently, "I want you to know that you're safe now. I've just spoken with your grandmother, and she's on her way to the airport. She's very concerned about you." Amara's heart raced at the mention of her grandmother. "She is?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and disbelief. "Grandma Eleanor is coming." "Yes," the captain replied, his voice warm and reassuring. "She told me to keep an eye on you and make sure you're treated with the respect you deserve. You're not just any passenger, you're part of our family now." The words washed over Amara like a soothing balm. For so long, she had felt small and insignificant, but now she was being recognized for who she truly was. The weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders as she nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to sit in my seat." "I understand," Captain Harris said, his eyes filled with empathy. "And I'm sorry for how you were treated. It was a misunderstanding, and I assure you, it won't happen again." As he spoke, Lisa and Richard stood nearby, their expressions shifting from disbelief to concern. They had witnessed the transformation in the cabin, and now they were grappling with the reality of their earlier actions. "Captain," Lisa began, her voice shaky, "we didn't know. We thought—" "You thought wrong," the captain interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "You judged her based on her appearance and made assumptions that were completely unfounded. This is a lesson for all of us." Amara watched as Lisa's face flushed with embarrassment. She had been so quick to dismiss her, so eager to enforce rules without understanding the situation. Now, the weight of her actions hung heavy in the air. Meanwhile, the Reynolds family was in a state of shock. Mr. Reynolds leaned forward, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. "What do you mean she's Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter? That's impossible." Mrs. Reynolds scoffed, crossing her arms. "She doesn't look like someone who would fly first class. This must be a mistake." Brayden, who had been recording the entire incident on his phone, lowered it slightly, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. "Wait, are you serious? She's related to Eleanor Blackwell?" "Yes," Tanya interjected, stepping closer to Amara. "And she deserves respect, just like everyone else on this flight." The passengers around them began to murmur, the realization of who Amara was sinking in. Some looked at her with newfound respect, while others still seemed skeptical. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and Amara could feel the weight of their gazes. "Listen," Captain Harris said, standing up and addressing the cabin. "We've all witnessed a misunderstanding today. I want to assure you that we take this matter seriously. Amara, you are welcome in first class, and I apologize for how you've been treated." The murmurs grew louder, and Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't just a child being dismissed anymore. She was part of something bigger. "Eleanor Blackwell is a respected figure in this industry," the captain continued, "and we will ensure that her granddaughter is treated with the dignity she deserves." Richard and Lisa exchanged glances, their earlier confidence shaken. "We didn't know," Lisa admitted, her voice softer now. "We thought—" "You thought wrong," Tanya interjected, her tone firm. "You judged her based on her appearance and made assumptions that were completely unfounded." As the captain prepared to make an announcement to the entire cabin, the tension shifted. The passengers who had once been indifferent or cruel were now leaning forward, eager to hear what would happen next. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Harris began, his voice steady and authoritative. I want to thank you for your patience during this situation. We are now in the process of confirming Amara's identity with her grandmother, and I assure you that we will resolve this matter promptly." The cabin buzzed with whispers, and Amara could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, some filled with sympathy, others still skeptical. But she held on to the hope that her grandmother would come through for her. "Thank you for your understanding," the captain concluded, "and thank you, Amara, for your patience as well." As he stepped back, Amara felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. She had stood her ground, and now the truth was finally coming to light. The power of her last name had shifted the entire narrative, and she was no longer just a child in distress. She was Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter, and she would not be silenced. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted dramatically as the realization of Amara's true identity sank in. Captain Harris stood tall, his presence commanding the attention of every passenger. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "I want to clarify that this young lady, Amara Johnson Blackwell, is not just any passenger. She is the granddaughter of Eleanor Blackwell, the CEO of this airline." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Amara felt the weight of their gazes shift from judgment to curiosity, and then to respect. The murmurs grew louder, a mix of disbelief and admiration. "Wait, what?" Mr. Reynolds exclaimed, his face paling. "You can't be serious." Mrs. Reynolds looked equally stunned, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. "This must be a mistake," she stammered, glancing at her husband. "She doesn't look like someone who would fly first class." Braden, who had been recording the entire incident, lowered his phone, his expression shifting from amusement to shock. "Are you serious? She's related to Eleanor Blackwell?" "Yes," Tanya affirmed, stepping closer to Amara, her voice filled with conviction. "And she deserves respect, just like everyone else on this flight." The passengers around them began to murmur. The realization of who Amara was sinking in. Some looked at her with newfound respect, while others still seemed skeptical. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and Amara could feel the weight of their gazes. "Listen," Captain Harris said, addressing the cabin once more. "We've all witnessed a misunderstanding today. I want to assure you that we take this matter seriously. Amara, you are welcome in first class, and I apologize for how you've been treated." The murmurs grew louder, and Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't just a child being dismissed anymore. She was part of something bigger. "Eleanor Blackwell is a respected figure in this industry," the captain continued, "and we will ensure that her granddaughter is treated with the dignity she deserves." Richard and Lisa exchanged glances, their earlier confidence shaken. "We didn't know," Lisa admitted, her voice softer now. "We thought—" "You thought wrong," Tanya interjected, her tone firm. "You judged her based on her appearance and made assumptions that were completely unfounded." As the captain prepared to make an announcement to the entire cabin, the tension shifted. The passengers who had once been indifferent or cruel were now leaning forward, eager to hear what would happen next. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Harris began, his voice steady and authoritative, "I want to thank you for your patience during this situation. We are now in the process of confirming Amara's identity with her grandmother, and I assure you that we will resolve this matter promptly." The cabin buzzed with whispers, and Amara could feel the eyes of the passengers on her. Some filled with sympathy, others still skeptical. But she held on to the hope that her grandmother would come through for her. "Thank you for your understanding," the captain concluded. "And thank you, Amara, for your patience as well." As he stepped back, Amara felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. She had stood her ground, and now the truth was finally coming to light. The power of her last name had shifted the entire narrative, and she was no longer just a child in distress. She was Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter, and she would not be silenced. The Reynolds family sat in stunned silence, their earlier arrogance replaced by a palpable sense of embarrassment. Mr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Mrs. Reynolds fidgeted with her designer handbag, unable to meet Amara's gaze. "Amara," the captain said, kneeling down to her level once more, "I want you to know that you are safe now. We're going to take care of everything." Amara nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had felt so alone, but now she was surrounded by people who believed in her. The captain's kindness and the support of Tanya made her feel valued and respected. As the cabin settled into a new sense of calm, Amara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. She was no longer just a child being dismissed, she was part of something significant, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The cabin was filled with a palpable tension as Captain Harris stood by the phone, waiting for Eleanor Blackwell to call. Amara sat on the edge of her seat, her heart racing with anticipation. She could hardly believe that her grandmother was on her way, and the thought of seeing her filled her with hope. "Just a moment," the captain said, glancing at Amara with a reassuring smile. "We'll get this sorted out." As the phone rang, the cabin fell silent, all eyes on the captain. Amara could feel the weight of the passengers' gazes, a mix of curiosity and concern. She clutched Mr. Buttons tightly, seeking comfort in the familiar softness of her beloved teddy bear. "Captain Harris," he answered, his voice steady and authoritative. "Thank you for calling." Amara leaned forward, straining to hear her grandmother's voice on the other end. The captain's expression shifted as he listened intently, nodding along to Eleanor's words. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. We've been waiting for your call." Amara's heart raced as she imagined her grandmother on the other end of the line, her voice calm and reassuring. She could picture Eleanor's warm smile, the way her eyes sparkled with kindness. It felt like a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of despair. "Amara is here with me," the captain said, glancing down at her. "She's safe, and we're taking care of everything." The moment the captain mentioned her name, Amara felt a rush of warmth. Hearing her grandmother's name spoken aloud made everything feel more real. She was no longer just a child in distress. She was Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter, and she was about to be reunited with the person who meant the most to her. "Of course, ma'am," the captain continued, his tone respectful. "We'll make sure she's treated with the utmost care." As he spoke, Amara could see the expressions of the passengers around her shifting. The earlier skepticism had faded, replaced by a sense of understanding and empathy. They were witnessing something significant unfold, and Amara felt the weight of their support. "Thank you, ma'am," the captain said, finally hanging up the phone. He turned to Amara, his expression warm. "Your grandmother is on her way to the airport, and she's very concerned about you." Amara's heart soared at the news. "Really?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," the captain replied, kneeling down to her level. "She's coming to make sure you're okay. You're not alone anymore." Tears of relief filled Amara's eyes as she nodded, overwhelmed by the kindness surrounding her. She had felt so small and insignificant, but now she was part of something much bigger. The realization that her grandmother was on her way filled her with a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. As the captain stood up, he addressed the cabin once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience during this situation. We've all witnessed a misunderstanding today, and I assure you that we take this matter seriously. Amara is a valued passenger, and we will ensure she is treated with the respect she deserves." The passengers began to murmur, their expressions shifting from skepticism to understanding. Amara could feel the warmth of their support, and it filled her with a sense of empowerment. She was no longer just a child being dismissed. She was part of something significant. "Thank you for your understanding," the captain concluded, "and thank you, Amara, for your patience as well." As he stepped back, Amara felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. She had stood her ground, and now the truth was finally coming to light. The power of her last name had shifted the entire narrative, and she was no longer just a child in distress. She was Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter, and she would not be silenced. The cabin buzzed with whispers as the passengers processed the news. Amara could feel their eyes on her, some filled with sympathy, others still skeptical. But she held on to the hope that her grandmother would come through for her, and she knew that she was finally safe. The cabin buzzed with anticipation as Captain Harris prepared to connect Amara with her grandmother. Amara sat on the edge of her seat, her heart racing with excitement and anxiety. She could hardly believe that she was about to speak to Eleanor Blackwell, the woman she admired more than anyone else in the world. "Just a moment, Amara," the captain said, adjusting the tablet in his hands. "I'm setting up the video call now." Amara's palms were sweaty as she clutched Mr. Buttons tightly. She had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was happening, she felt a mix of joy and fear. What would her grandmother say? Would she be angry about how Amara had been treated? The screen flickered to life, and Amara's breath caught in her throat as she saw her grandmother's familiar face appear. Eleanor looked just as she remembered, her hair perfectly styled, her smile warm and inviting. But there was a seriousness in her eyes that made Amara's heart race. "Amara, sweetheart," Eleanor exclaimed, her voice filled with concern. "Are you okay? I've been so worried about you." "I'm okay, Grandma," Amara replied, her voice trembling. "But they treated me really badly on the plane." Eleanor's expression shifted instantly, her brow furrowing with concern. "What do you mean? What happened?" Amara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "They thought I didn't belong in first class. The flight attendants were really mean to me. They didn't believe I was your granddaughter." Eleanor's eyes widened in disbelief. "Oh, Amara, I'm so sorry. I can't believe they treated you that way. You deserve to be treated with respect, especially on my airline." The captain stood nearby, listening intently as Eleanor spoke. He could see the pain in Amara's eyes and felt a surge of responsibility to make things right. "Ma'am," he interjected gently, "I want to assure you that we are addressing this situation immediately. Amara is safe now, and we will ensure she is treated with the dignity she deserves." Eleanor nodded, her expression softening as she looked at Amara. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your support. Amara, I want you to know that I'm on my way to the airport right now. I'll be there as soon as I can." Amara's heart swelled with relief. "Really? You're coming?" "Yes, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss it for the world," Eleanor replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself. You did the right thing by staying in your seat." Tears of gratitude filled Amara's eyes as she listened to her grandmother's words. "Thank you, Grandma. I was so scared." "I know, my love," Eleanor said softly, "but you're stronger than you think. Remember, you are a Blackwell, and we don't back down from anyone. I'll make sure those who treated you poorly understand the consequences of their actions." The captain nodded in agreement. "We take this matter very seriously, ma'am. We will ensure that Amara is treated with the utmost respect moving forward." As the conversation continued, Amara felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. Her grandmother's presence, even through the screen, made her feel safe and valued. The earlier humiliation began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of pride in her identity. "Amara," Eleanor said, her tone shifting to one of authority, "I want you to know that you are important, not just to me, but to everyone who believes in you. You have a voice, and it matters." The passengers around them began to listen more intently, the earlier skepticism replaced by a sense of respect for Amara. They were witnessing a powerful moment, and the atmosphere in the cabin shifted once again. "Thank you, Grandma," Amara said, her voice filled with emotion. "I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, her eyes shining with pride. "And I'll be there soon. Just hold tight." As the call ended, Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She was no longer just a child in distress. She was Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter, and she would not be silenced. The truth had come to light, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The cabin was alive with a mix of anticipation and anxiety as the passengers awaited Eleanor Blackwell's arrival. Amara sat in her seat, her heart racing with a blend of excitement and nervousness. She had never felt so many eyes on her at once, but this time it was different. This time she felt a sense of pride in who she was. As the plane began to taxi toward the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to land shortly. I want to thank you all for your patience during this situation. We will be addressing the matter of our young passenger, Amara Johnson Blackwell, with the utmost seriousness." Amara's heart swelled at the mention of her name. She was no longer just a child in distress. She was part of something significant. The truth had come to light, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Just as the plane came to a stop, the cabin door swung open and Eleanor stepped inside, her presence commanding immediate attention. She wore a tailored suit that exuded confidence, and her expression was a mix of determination and concern. The moment she entered, the atmosphere shifted, and all eyes turned to her. "Amara!" Eleanor called, her voice warm and inviting. She rushed down the aisle, her heels clicking against the floor, and knelt beside Amara, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through, my love." Amara hugged her grandmother tightly, feeling the warmth and safety that only Eleanor could provide. "I was so scared, Grandma," she whispered, her voice muffled against Eleanor's shoulder. "I know, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, pulling back to look into Amara's eyes. "But you did the right thing by staying in your seat. You are strong, and I'm proud of you." As Eleanor stood up, her gaze shifted to the flight attendants. "I need to speak with you both," she said, her tone firm. "This situation is unacceptable. I want the entire crew replaced before we take off again." Lisa and Richard exchanged nervous glances, their earlier confidence evaporating. "Ma'am, we didn't know," Lisa began, but Eleanor cut her off. "Exactly. You didn't know. You judged my granddaughter based on her appearance and treated her with disrespect. That is not how we operate in this airline, and it will not be tolerated." The passengers around them began to murmur, some nodding in agreement. Amara could feel the support of those around her, and it filled her with a sense of empowerment. She was no longer alone. She had a community standing behind her. "Eleanor, please," Richard said, his voice shaky. "It was a misunderstanding. You thought wrong," Eleanor replied, her voice steady and unwavering. "You made assumptions that were completely unfounded. I expect better from my airline." The tension in the cabin was palpable as Eleanor's words hung in the air. The passengers were witnessing a powerful moment, and Amara felt a surge of pride. Her grandmother was standing up for her, and it made all the difference. As Eleanor continued to address the crew, the family Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mr. Reynolds leaned forward, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. "What do you mean she's Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter? That's impossible." Mrs. Reynolds scoffed, crossing her arms. "She doesn't look like someone who would fly first class. This must be a mistake." Braden, who had been recording the entire incident, lowered his phone, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. "Wait, are you serious? She's related to Eleanor Blackwell?" "Yes," Tanya interjected, stepping closer to Amara. "And she deserves respect, just like everyone else on this flight." The passengers around them began to murmur, the realization of who Amara was sinking in. Some looked at her with newfound respect, while others still seemed skeptical. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and Amara could feel the weight of their gazes. "Listen," Captain Harris said, standing up and addressing the cabin. "We've all witnessed a misunderstanding today. I want to assure you that we take this matter seriously. Amara, you are welcome in first class, and I apologize for how you've been treated." The murmurs grew louder, and Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't just a child being dismissed anymore. She was part of something bigger. "Eleanor Blackwell is a respected figure in this industry," the captain continued, "and we will ensure that her granddaughter is treated with the dignity she deserves." As Eleanor took her place beside Amara, the cabin buzzed with whispers of disbelief and admiration. The passengers were beginning to understand the gravity of the situation, and Amara felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. She was no longer just a child in distress. She was Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter, and she would not be silenced. As the cabin door swung open once more, 2 airport security officers stepped inside, their presence commanding immediate attention. The atmosphere shifted again, the tension palpable as everyone turned to see what would happen next. Amara's heart raced. She had been through so much already, and now the reality of the situation was about to unfold. "Captain Harris," one of the officers said, his voice steady and authoritative. "We've been informed of a situation involving a minor and a potential misunderstanding regarding her identity." "Yes," the captain replied, gesturing toward Amara. "This is Amara Johnson Blackwell, granddaughter of Eleanor Blackwell. She has been treated unfairly by the crew, and I want to ensure that she is safe and respected moving forward." The officers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from professional detachment to concern as they approached Amara. "Is everything all right, young lady?" one of them asked, kneeling down to her level. Amara nodded, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm okay now. My grandma's coming." "Good to hear," the officer said, offering her a reassuring smile. "We just want to make sure you're safe. If you need anything, don't hesitate to let us know." As the officers spoke with Amara, the family Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mr. Reynolds leaned forward, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. "What do you mean she's Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter? That's impossible." Mrs. Reynolds scoffed, crossing her arms. "She doesn't look like someone who would fly first class. This must be a mistake." Braden, who had been recording the entire incident, lowered his phone, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. "Wait, are you serious? She's related to Eleanor Blackwell?" "Yes," Tanya interjected, stepping closer to Amara. "And she deserves respect, just like everyone else on this flight." The passengers around them began to murmur, the realization of who Amara was sinking in. Some looked at her with newfound respect, while others still seemed skeptical. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and Amara could feel the weight of their gazes. "Listen," Captain Harris said, standing up and addressing the cabin. "We've all witnessed a misunderstanding today. I want to assure you that we take this matter seriously. Amara, you are welcome in first class, and I apologize for how you've been treated." The murmurs grew louder, and Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't just a child being dismissed anymore. She was part of something bigger. "Eleanor Blackwell is a respected figure in this industry," the captain continued, "and we will ensure that her granddaughter is treated with the dignity she deserves." As the officers began to speak with the Reynolds family, Amara felt a sense of justice wash over her. She had been wronged, but now the truth was coming to light, and those who had treated her poorly were facing the consequences. "Ma'am," one of the officers said to Mrs. Reynolds, "we need to inform you that you and your family will have to wait for the next flight to Atlanta. You will not be allowed to board this one." "What?" Mr. Reynolds exclaimed, his face turning red with anger. "This is ridiculous. We have important meetings to attend." The officer remained calm. "I understand, but given the circumstances, we cannot allow you to travel on this flight. You will need to rebook your tickets." As the reality of the situation sank in, Mrs. Reynolds' expression shifted from disbelief to frustration. "This is unacceptable. We demand to speak to someone in charge." "You are speaking to someone in charge," the officer replied firmly, "and I suggest you comply with our instructions." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted again, the passengers watching with a mix of sympathy and satisfaction. Amara felt a surge of empowerment as she realized that justice was being served. The people who had treated her poorly were now facing the consequences of their actions. Meanwhile, Tanya stepped forward, her expression determined. "I want to take responsibility for what happened today. I will be the temporary chief flight attendant for this flight, and I will ensure that Amara is treated with the respect she deserves." The passengers began to applaud, their support for Amara evident. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed from one of tension and hostility to one of solidarity and understanding. As the officers escorted the Reynolds family off the plane, Amara felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had stood her ground, and now the truth was finally coming to light. The power of her last name had shifted the entire narrative, and she was no longer just a child in distress. She was Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter, and she would not be silenced. With the cabin settling into a new sense of calm, Amara looked up at Tanya, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you for believing in me," she said softly. Tanya smiled warmly. "You deserve to be believed in, Amara. You're stronger than you know." As the plane prepared for takeoff, Amara felt a sense of hope and empowerment. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she had the support of those around her. As the plane prepared for takeoff once again, The atmosphere in the cabin was markedly different. The tension that had once filled the air had been replaced by a sense of camaraderie and support. Amara sat in her seat, her heart still racing from the whirlwind of events, but now she felt a sense of belonging. The new flight attendants entered the cabin, their smiles warm and welcoming. "Good afternoon, everyone," one of them announced cheerfully. "We're excited to have you on board today. My name is Mia, and this is my colleague Jake. We're here to ensure you have a wonderful flight." Amara watched as Mia and Jake moved through the cabin, greeting passengers with genuine kindness. It was a stark contrast to the treatment she had received earlier, and she felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was how it was supposed to be. Everyone treated with respect regardless of their age or appearance. "Amara, how are you feeling?" Tanya asked, sliding into the seat next to her. "I just wanted to check in on you." "I'm okay," Amara replied, her voice still a little shaky. "I can't believe everything that happened." Tanya nodded, her expression understanding. "It was a lot to go through, but you handled it with so much strength. I'm really proud of you." "Thank you," Amara said, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I just wanted to sit in my seat. I didn't want any of this to happen." "I know," Tanya said softly. "But sometimes, standing up for yourself is the most important thing you can do. You showed everyone that you deserve to be treated with respect." As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Amara felt a sense of excitement bubbling within her. She was on her way to Atlanta, and soon she would be reunited with her grandmother. The thought filled her with joy, and she couldn't wait to share her experience with Eleanor. "Did you know that your grandmother has a scholarship program for young girls?" Tanya asked, breaking Amara's thoughts. "She helps girls like you achieve their dreams." Amara's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? I didn't know that." "Yes. She believes in empowering young women to pursue their education and follow their passions," Tanya explained. "You could be a part of that program if you want." "Wow," Amara said, her mind racing with possibilities. "I want to be a scientist when I grow up. Maybe I could use the scholarship to help me go to college." "Absolutely," Tanya encouraged. "You have so much potential, Amara. Just remember that you can achieve anything you set your mind to." As the plane lifted off the ground, Amara felt a rush of exhilaration. She was leaving behind the negativity of the past few hours and embracing a new beginning. The sky stretched out before her, vast and full of possibilities. "Why do people treat others differently?" Amara asked suddenly, her brow furrowing in thought. "Why did they think I didn't belong in first class?" Tanya took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes people judge others based on their appearance or background. It's not fair, but it happens. What's important is that you know your worth and never let anyone make you feel less than you are." Amara nodded, absorbing Tanya's words. "I guess I just want everyone to be nice to each other." "That's a beautiful wish, Amara," Tanya said, smiling. "And you can help make that happen. By being kind and standing up for yourself and others, you can inspire change." As the plane soared higher into the sky, Amara felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. She was ready to embrace her identity, her heritage, and the legacy of her grandmother. She would not let anyone diminish her worth again. With a newfound determination, Amara looked out the window at the clouds below, feeling a sense of hope and excitement for the future. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that she had the strength to face it head-on. As the plane finally came to a stop at the gate, Amara's heart raced with anticipation. She could hardly contain her excitement as the cabin began to empty. The earlier tension had dissipated, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and support among the passengers. But all Amara could think about was her grandmother. "Are you ready to see her?" Tanya asked, smiling as she helped Amara gather her belongings. "Yes," Amara exclaimed, her eyes shining with joy. "I can't wait." As the last of the passengers disembarked, Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She could already picture Eleanor's warm smile and the way her eyes sparkled with love. The moment the cabin door opened, Amara rushed toward the exit, her feet barely touching the ground. And there she was, Eleanor Blackwell, standing at the gate with open arms, her expression a mix of relief and pride. "Amara," she called, her voice filled with warmth. "Grandma," Amara shouted, running into Eleanor's embrace. The world around them faded away as they held each other tightly, the bond between them stronger than ever. "I was so worried about you," Eleanor said, pulling back to look into Amara's eyes. "I heard everything that happened on the flight. You were so brave." Amara felt a rush of warmth at her grandmother's words. "I was scared, Grandma. They didn't believe me." "I know, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, her voice gentle. "But you stood your ground, and that takes a lot of courage. I'm proud of you for not letting anyone make you feel less than you are." As they walked together toward the baggage claim, Amara couldn't help but share her thoughts. Why do people treat others differently? Why did they think I didn't belong in first class? Eleanor sighed, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes, people judge others based on their appearance or background. It's a sad reality, but it happens. What's important is that you know your worth and never let anyone diminish it. Amara nodded, absorbing her grandmother's words. "I want to help people understand that everyone deserves respect." "That's a beautiful goal, Amara," Eleanor said, her eyes shining with pride. "And you can make a difference. By being kind and standing up for yourself and others, you can inspire change." As they reached the baggage claim, Amara spotted her backpack and Mr. Buttons, who had been her constant companion throughout the ordeal. She felt a sense of comfort in their familiarity. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" Amara said, her voice hesitant. "Of course, my love. Ask me anything," Eleanor replied, kneeling down to Amara's level. "Will you help me become a scientist one day?" Amara asked, her eyes wide with hope. Eleanor smiled warmly. "Absolutely. I'll do everything I can to support you. You have so much potential, Amara. You can achieve anything you set your mind to." Amara felt a surge of determination. "I want to help other kids like me. I want to show them that they can be anything they want to be." "That's the spirit!" Eleanor exclaimed, standing up and wrapping her arm around Amara's shoulders. "And remember, you're not alone. You have a whole family behind you supporting you every step of the way." As they walked out of the airport, Amara felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. She had faced adversity and emerged stronger, ready to embrace her identity and her future. The lessons she had learned during the flight would stay with her forever. "Thank you for believing in me, Grandma," Amara said, looking up at Eleanor with gratitude. "Always, my dear," Eleanor replied, her voice filled with love. "You are a Blackwell, and we don't back down from anyone. Together, we will make the world a better place." As they stepped into the sunlight, Amara felt a sense of hope and excitement for the future. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she had the strength to overcome any challenge. With her grandmother by her side, she knew she could achieve anything.